This past week, I did something a little out of the ordinary, and it may have made some people uncomfortable if they saw me doing it. This probably isn't a normal way to start a message. I'm hoping you haven't heard a pastor say this before. But I took that risk of making people uncomfortable. And what I did was I drove around our neighborhood. I drove around several blocks close to our neighborhood. And I looked at 250 different homes. And what I was doing is I was looking at their decorations. Now that's not too far out of the ordinary. Maybe this time of year, this is something almost normal, that we go around and we look at lights and we look at decorations. It's something that helps us get in the spirit, helps us think of Christmas, helps us be in the spirit of the season. But I was doing it during the day. So I couldn't see any of the lights. But I was looking around and I was actually writing down how many houses had different kinds of decorations. I wanted to see what people were doing to decorate their houses. And some of what I found is really interesting, not necessarily far from what I expected. Out of the 250 houses that were decorated, only 84% had lights. You'd almost think that 100% of the ones that are decorated would have lights. That if you do nothing else, that's like the base that you do, maybe. So I was a little surprised that not all the houses had lights, but it was close to all of them, about 84%. 59% of the houses had wreaths. 38% had snowmen of different sorts. Some had multiple snowmen, some had one snowman, some had ones that light up, some had ones that inflate and wave at you. 26% of the houses had Santa or elves or some combination of them outside. 18% had movie characters. I saw the movie Elf, I saw the movie Rudolph, I saw Star Wars movies, I saw all different kinds of movie characters that had representation, I guess you could say, on people's front yards. 16% had deer of some sort, whether it was Rudolph or if it was just deer in general. 12% had candy canes, either marking a lane or just as a decoration. And 5% had mangers. 5% out of 250. Now, it's not a scientific study. There could be any number of reasons why somebody may not put a manger out. It might be affordability. Maybe it costs more to get together the pieces of a manger scene to put that out. It could be avoiding confrontation with a particular neighbor. It could be something they just don't feel comfortable doing. It could be they don't like how it looks. It could be any number of things. And I'm not saying anything against people that don't have a manger scene in front of their house. I don't have a manger scene in front of my house. Overall, however, I think there may be one thing among other indicators that it can tell us. That this, along with other things, can point us to something. I think that we in our culture, we don't really consider this to be the fun or exciting part of Christmas. This is the business part. This is the responsible part. And the fun or the exciting part is the rest of it. Is that fair? I don't know. Is that a fair assessment of this information? I don't know. But I wonder if it is. You know, why do people go and decorate for Christmas? Why do people come here on Christmas Eve? Maybe they're curious. Maybe you're pressured by a family member or friend. Maybe it's out of tradition. Maybe it's something you're excited about. I don't know. Maybe somebody received an invitation. Or maybe it's a habit, whether it's a weekly habit or a twice-a-year habit. But maybe some people really are excited about what Christmas is, about what we remember, about what we celebrate, what we look forward to. But I know that sometimes it seems like it's just too much. We don't want more demands. We don't want more demands on our time. We don't want more needs demanded of us. See, we've got a lot going on, especially this time of year. We're busy. We're running around. It's hard to get control of our own pace sometimes, especially this time of year. And that pace, sometimes it distracts us from the darkness that we're living in, from the brokenness of the world that invades on all our lives, however it may show up in our own lives, whether it's grieving a loved one, or whether it's struggling with work, whether it's struggling being a parent, not knowing how to do that. I've yet to meet an expert parent. That's okay. I've yet to meet an expert at dealing with grief. I've yet to meet an expert at dealing with mental illness. The struggles and the stresses in our lives, it compounds the busyness that we have, and sometimes the busyness becomes almost a distraction from it. lets us look away from it, lets us see something else. But busyness does one more thing. Busyness, especially when it's not busyness that we choose, like so often it is. When it's not busyness that we choose, it's a lack of freedom. It looks like it's a lot of options. Our world looks like it gives us a lot of options. And yet it keeps us too busy to choose between those options. It keeps us too busy to stop and think. It keeps us too busy to stop and ponder and work through and pray. So we get that busy and we start thinking, I don't need more rules. I don't need one more person looking over my shoulder telling me if I'm doing the right thing or not. I don't need one more person looking over my shoulder trying to tell me that this is what I should do and this is what I should not do. This is where I should go and this is where I should not go. Because I've already got enough of that in my life. We start to think that we just don't need more rules. And perhaps that's what the manger, in a way, comes to represent. That's what the manger side of Christmas comes to be in our thinking, subliminally, or in our subconscious. Maybe we don't really quite think of it in those words or speak of it in those words, but it comes to be, this is another set of rules. This is something I have to do. And I think some of that comes from what we tend to think God is like. Studies have shown that people generally think of God in terms of how they think of their father. If their father was a really good person, they think of God as a really good person. If their father was really strict and demanding, they tend to think of God as really strict and demanding. But generally, often, we think of God as strict and formal, demanding to the point of almost being unrealistic sometimes, unwavering in his response when you fail to meet his standards. These are the characteristics that in our mind we place upon God without necessarily realizing we're doing it. God isn't fun. God isn't exciting. God is one more demand to meet. But I like Christmas because at Christmas, and particularly in the manger, God reveals himself not to be what we expect, not to be what we think he is. See, we humans, we tend to think of God, and you can look at throughout history, you can look at throughout different religions, you can look at how people generally think of divinity as demanding, controlling, all-powerful, and not really caring about us. Separate. There's no relationship. There's no love. There's nothing that they would do for us just because. And yet in the manger we see something drastically different. Something that takes our expectations and turns it upside down on its head. Because in the manger we see God. In the manger we see God revealing himself who he really is. See, Mary and Joseph, they had come from Nazareth. They weren't just visiting Nazareth. That was where they were from. It's probably where Joseph's father was from. It's probably where Joseph's father's father was from. This backwoods town, out of nowhere, tiny population, that was known by a saying that nothing good can come out of Nazareth. What good could possibly come from there? He was born amidst Mary and Joseph's worry and stress. Traveling, being forced to travel by the Roman government, being forced to travel by the authorities. Not really in the best conditions. I don't know how many of you have been pregnant before. I would guess at least half of you have never been pregnant before because you're guys. But traveling on a donkey for days and days while you're pregnant and near giving birth was probably a very, very uncomfortable thing. And then they get there and the crowds are just insane. The crowds are busy. The crowds are filled up. I left something on the back table there, something I had wrote a few years ago about the innkeeper. And just an idea of what it may have been like from the innkeeper's point of view. But inns in those days, their houses were built with 2 levels. And usually the top level, the family would live in. The bottom level, livestock would be in. They would keep their livestock indoors. Now, places that were inns, they didn't have the livestock, or maybe the guests would be staying with the livestock in that bottom level. But it says that Mary and Joseph never even got room there. They were sent elsewhere. They're sent to a place where animals are feeding, sent to a place where your newborn baby is put in a trough meant for animal feed. Now, those of you that are parents, I don't know if you ever imagined on the night that your child was born, setting them down in a place where animals eat. But this was God. This was God revealing to us who and what he was. God revealing to us the extents that he would go to for us. The extent that he knows the darkness that we walk through every day. And what he was willing to set aside to bring light and healing and wholeness and redemption and forgiveness into our own lives. In the manger, we see several things. But some of them we focused on our Wednesday study these past 4 weeks throughout Advent. There's the Advent themes of hope and peace and joy and love. But then there's also these titles from Isaiah 9 of Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And they pair together and they show us who God is and tell us what God is doing for us in the manger. See, hope pairs with Wonderful Counselor. Hope that isn't just wishful thinking, that looks forward to fulfillment of promise. See, he is a wonderful counselor, and those words mean that he is a counselor. He counsels those in charge. He counsels those who are living through. He counsels those who have to make decisions. He is a wise guide, and he knows the way. He knows the reasons that we can turn to despair, and he gives us instead a reason to hope. Next is peace, paired with mighty God. Peace that isn't just cessation of hostility, but is a calmness and a tranquility that is within us and is not dependent upon the circumstances around us. And we can have this peace because he is mighty God. He is the creator. He is almighty over all of creation, even while he's in the manger. And so he offers us and enables us to have peace where it feels like peace is not possible. Like that song that we sang about hearing the bells ring. The author that wrote that had so much going on wrong in his life. His first wife had died. Some of his children had died. His second wife had burned to death when she was writing letters and trying to seal the letters with wax, and the candle lit her dress on fire. The author of that song tried to smother the flames with his own body, and his face was so disfigured that he wore a beard the rest of his life to cover it up. And it became part of what he was known for. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And just before he wrote that, he had gotten word that his son had been shot in the Civil War. His son who had gone off to war without his permission. His son survived. But he goes out on Christmas Day. Just everything seems so dark and terrible. And he's reminded by the manger. He's pointed to the manger by the bells of who God is. He's still alive. He's still here. He's still fighting for us. Next is joy, paired with everlasting Father. His reign is everlasting from beginning to end, everlasting, for infinity. And because he is reigning, because he wants to be our Father, we can have a true joy that is not dependent upon our circumstances. It's not just happiness, but goes deeper and beyond that. Next, there is love, paired with Prince of Peace. In old times, the son of the king was responsible for the peace of the realm. And often that peace was enforced through their weapons. The peace was forced by forcing others to lay down their weapons. But Jesus approaches peace in a different way. He doesn't approach it with a sword. He approaches it with his vulnerability. And he gives us the space to have true peace within us because of what he did. See, the world appears to offer us an abundance of options, an overload of options. I've been in a store before and I've had a customer joke with me that there's just too many options here. There's too many different kinds of taco shells. There's too many different kinds of spices. There's too many different options for tuna fish. Tuna fish, really? Do we need that many options for tuna fish? You can buy singles or 4-packs or 8-packs in 6 or 7 different brands, in oil or in water. Some of the options just don't make sense. Just one more company and one more company and one more company trying to get a share of the profits. So there appears to be a multitude of options, but in reality, In lived experience, we often find ourselves left with fewer and fewer options. We get busier and busier and busier, and we have fewer and fewer options. And all we want is just for the world to stop for a moment. Let us get off the ride before we get too dizzy. We find that we aren't so much living life as instead it sometimes seems that life is living us. Christ offers you freedom. You see, the manger isn't the boring part of Christmas, although it may appear to be from our perspective sometimes. The manger is the introduction of an unexpected God showing up in unexpected ways. A God that meets you in your chaos, meets you in your stress, meets you in your difficulty, meets you in your infirmity, meets you in your sin and your grief, and says, let me walk with you. Let me share this path with you. Let me share this journey with you, and let me show you a new way. You'll notice tonight that our manger is empty. There's no baby in our manger. It's because we look at Christmas, but we know that Christmas was a long time ago. The first Christmas was a long time ago. And while we remember how Jesus came, how God became human, we know that he didn't stay in that manger. He went forward from there. And he walked through life. He walked through what we experience. And he spent years ministering to people, giving sight to the blind, giving hearing to the deaf, letting the mute speak, casting out demons, and showing us a different way, preaching to people good news of a new kingdom that was coming, a kingdom that turns the kingdoms of this world on their head and turns their expectations upside down. He went forth from there and he died on the cross for us. But the cross itself did not remain full either. The cross is empty, just as the grave is empty, because he went forth for us, doing what we could not do, and bringing us into a place that we could not go. Why? Because he loves us. That's why. And we remember this at communion. We remember God's love for us as we come to the table. We remember God's love for us as we come and celebrate the sacrament that he initiated. Because during his ministry on the Last Supper, Jesus sat around the table with his disciples. He sat around with them doing a traditional thing, doing something that people were used to doing. Having the Sabbath meal, having the Passover meal. But he did something differently as they were gathered there. First, he went around and he washed all their feet. He took on the role of a lowly servant, something that not even Jewish servants would do, but only Gentile servants in rich households would do. And Jesus himself, instead of taking what was rightfully his, instead of accepting the leadership, accepting the head position, he took the lowest position. This is the king that invites us to be part of his kingdom. He took the lowest position, he washed all their feet, and he says, I have loved you. I have served you. Now do for each other as I have done for you. And do for the world as I have done for you. Because by your love for each other, they will know that you are my disciples. Later on in the supper, he took the bread, and he lifted it up, and he broke it. He blessed it, he gave thanks to God, passed around to his disciples and said, take this all if you need from it. For this is my body given for you. Later on, he took the cup and he lifted it up to heaven and he gave thanks to his Father and passed around to his disciples. And he said, take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenants, given for you for the forgiveness of sins. If you haven't celebrated communion with us before, in the Church of the Nazarene, we celebrate an open table. All are welcome at Christ's table. So I invite you now to come forward to partake. Dr. Donnelly is going to come forward to help me. And I ask that you all come forward through the middle aisle, partake of the elements, go back to your seats, and then we will partake together.